Hi, I'm Beverly, and at 32, I thought I had life figured out. I owned a penthouse in downtown Seattle, ran my own successful real estate firm, and finally felt proud of what I'd built from nothing. My younger brother Carlos was getting married that weekend, and despite our complicated family history, I was genuinely excited to celebrate his happiness. But as I stood in my walk-in closet that Saturday morning choosing between two dresses for the ceremony, I had no idea that in just a few hours, my father would slap me across the face in front of 200 wedding guests. What happened next changed everything forever. Before we dive into this story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. If you're ready to hear how one moment of family betrayal led to the most liberating decision of my life, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. Trust me, you won't believe what my parents demanded from me that day. Growing up in a working-class family in Tacoma, Washington, I learned early that money was always tight and dreams were luxuries we couldn't afford. My parents, Harold and Agnes, worked multiple jobs just to keep our small rental house. Dad drove trucks for a shipping company while Mom cleaned offices at night. They were good people, but financial stress dominated every conversation, every decision, every argument in our household. My brother Carlos, 3 years younger than me, was the golden child from day one. Charismatic and charming, he could talk his way out of any trouble and into anyone's heart. While I spent my teenage years working part-time at a grocery store and studying for scholarships, Carlos focused on sports and socializing. Our parents never expected him to contribute financially, but they made it clear that my academic success came with future obligations to the family. After high school, I couldn't afford a 4-year university, so I started at Pierce College taking business classes while working 3 different jobs. I waited tables at a diner during breakfast shifts, filed paperwork at a law office in the afternoons, and cleaned commercial buildings on weekends. Every dollar I earned went toward tuition books and saving for my real estate license. The real estate world in Seattle was brutal for a 22-year-old girl from Tacoma with no connections, no mentor, and definitely no trust fund. I started at a small firm in Federal Way, making cold calls and showing tiny condos to first-time buyers. My first year, I made barely enough to cover my studio apartment rent and ramen noodles, but I was determined to prove that hard work could overcome any disadvantage. Slowly, I built a reputation for honesty and dedication. I specialized in helping working-class families find affordable homes, understanding their struggles because I'd lived them. By 25, I'd saved enough to move to a better firm in downtown Seattle. By 28, I was their top-selling agent. At 30, I opened my own boutique real estate company focusing on luxury properties. The Penthouse came 2 years later. It wasn't just a home. It represented every sacrifice, every 16-hour workday, every time I chose studying over socializing. Located on the 42nd floor of a glass tower overlooking Elliott Bay, it featured floor-to-ceiling windows, marble countertops, and a view that took my breath away every morning. The monthly mortgage payment was more than my parents' annual income, but I'd earned every square foot. Meanwhile, Carlos had bounced between community college, various jobs, and entrepreneurial schemes that never quite worked out. A food truck business that lasted 6 months. A fitness app that never launched. A cryptocurrency investment that wiped out his savings. Our parents consistently bailed him out, draining their retirement fund and taking on credit card debt to cover his mistakes. They never asked me directly for money, but the hints were constant. Comments about how successful I'd become, how family should take care of family, how Carlos just needed one good break to turn his life around. I'd helped when I could, paying for Carlos's car repairs, covering groceries, when Mom's hours got cut, sending birthday checks that somehow always got spent on bills. But I'd learned to maintain boundaries, knowing that my financial stability was the result of discipline they'd never required from Carlos. When Carlos announced his engagement to Janet 6 months ago, I was genuinely happy for him. Janet came from money her father owned several furniture stores across western Washington. Maybe she'd be the stability Carlos needed. Maybe her family's wealth meant less pressure on me to be the financial safety net. I should have known better. The wedding was scheduled for 2 o'clock at the Woodinville Country Club, an expensive venue surrounded by vineyards and rolling hills. As I pulled into the circular driveway in my BMW, I noticed the luxury cars filling the parking lot. Janet's family had clearly spared no expense, and I wondered privately if Carlos had contributed anything beyond showing up. Inside the clubhouse, I found my parents near the bridal party area, looking uncomfortable in their formal attire. Mom wore a navy dress we'd picked out together at Nordstrom Rack, while Dad tugged at his rented tuxedo collar. They seemed out of place among Janet's relatives, who moved through the space with the casual confidence that comes from generational wealth. "Beverly!" Mom rushed over, her face flushed with excitement and anxiety. "Doesn't everything look beautiful? Janet's mother hired a wedding planner from San Francisco. Can you imagine spending that much on flowers?" I hugged them both, noting the tension in Dad's shoulders and the worry lines around Mom's eyes. "Carlos must be nervous," I said, looking around for my brother. "He's getting ready with the groomsmen," Dad replied, his voice strained. "Listen, sweetheart, we need to talk later about Carlos and Janet's situation." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. "What situation?" Mom glanced around nervously. "Not here. After the ceremony. It's just, well, they're going to need some help getting started, and we can't—" "Mom, this is Carlos's wedding day. Can't family business wait?" Of course. But the way she exchanged looks with Dad told me this conversation was far from over. The next hour was a blur of introductions to Janet's extended family. Her aunts and uncles owned businesses. Her cousins had degrees from prestigious universities, and everyone seemed to speak in casual mentions of vacation homes and investment portfolios. I held my own in these conversations, my success in real estate giving me credibility, but I noticed my parents growing quieter and more withdrawn. During the ceremony, I sat in the second row, watching Carlos beam as Janet walked down the aisle in a dress that probably cost more than most people's cars. She looked radiant, truly happy, and for a moment I forgot about my parents' strange behavior. This was about love, about my brother starting a new chapter in his life. But as the minister spoke about partnership and shared responsibilities, I caught my parents whispering behind me. Agnes kept glancing in my direction, and Harold's jaw was set in the determined way that meant he'd made up his mind about something. My unease returned stronger now. The reception began immediately after the ceremony with cocktails on the terrace overlooking the golf course. Janet's father gave a toast about welcoming Carlos into their family, mentioning business opportunities and bright futures. Carlos looked slightly overwhelmed, but grateful. I was proud of him in that moment, hoping this marriage would finally give him the motivation to build something lasting. But as the evening progressed, I noticed a pattern. Various relatives kept approaching me with comments about my success, asking pointed questions about real estate investments and property values. Aunt Linda, Dad's sister, cornered me near the bar with observations about how well I'd done for myself and how important it was to remember family obligations. "Beverly," she said, sipping her wine, "Carlos is really struggling right now. Your parents are worried sick about him and Janet. It's such a shame when family members who could help just stand by and watch." I excused myself politely, but the message was clear. Somehow my brother's financial problems had become my responsibility to solve. The resentment I'd been pushing down for years began to surface. I'd worked incredibly hard for my success, making sacrifices and taking risks that Carlos had never been willing to make. Yet somehow in my family's eyes, that success came with automatic obligations to subsidize his choices. During dinner, I tried to focus on the celebration, laughing at the best man's speech and applauding the father-daughter dance. But I could feel my parents watching me, waiting for the right moment to pounce. That moment came as dessert was being served, and most guests were mingling on the dance floor. "Beverly, honey, can we step outside for a minute?" Mom's voice was carefully casual, but her eyes were desperate. "Just a quick family chat." I followed them onto a quieter section of the terrace, away from the main party, but still visible to other guests. The sun was setting over the vineyard, painting everything in golden light, but the beauty of the moment was lost on me as I saw my parents' faces. "Sweetheart," Dad began, "we need to discuss Carlos and Janet's living situation." "What about it?" I kept my voice neutral, though my heart was already racing. Mom jumped in, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Well, the thing is, Carlos lost his apartment last month. He couldn't make the rent payments, and you know how expensive everything is in Seattle now. He's been staying with friends, but he can't tell Janet's family about it. They think he's financially stable." "So where are they planning to live after the honeymoon?" I asked, though I was beginning to suspect I already knew the answer. Dad cleared his throat. "That's what we need to talk to you about. Your penthouse has plenty of space, and it would just be temporary until Carlos gets back on his feet." I stared at them, processing what they were really asking. "You want Carlos and Janet to move into my home?" "Just temporarily," Mom repeated quickly. "You have 3 bedrooms, and they wouldn't be any trouble. Janet comes from such a nice family, Beverly. She's used to a certain standard of living." The absurdity of the situation hit me like a physical blow. My brother had lied to his new wife about his financial situation, and my parents wanted me to enable this deception by giving up my personal space and privacy. "Absolutely not," I said firmly. "I'm happy to help Carlos find an apartment he can afford, or even help with a security deposit, but my home is not available." Dad's face darkened. "Beverly, this is your brother we're talking about. Family takes care of family." "I've been taking care of this family for years," I shot back, my voice rising slightly. "I've paid for car repairs, groceries, emergency expenses. I've helped when I could, but I'm not responsible for fixing Carlos's bad decisions." "Bad decisions?" Mom's voice turned shrill. "He's trying to build a life with Janet. They need our support." "They need his honesty," I corrected. "If Carlos can't afford to maintain Janet's lifestyle expectations, that's a conversation they need to have together. I'm not going to be part of deceiving his new wife." The conversation was attracting attention now. I could see other wedding guests glancing our way, though they couldn't hear the details over the band music. Janet's mother was among them, her expression curious and slightly concerned. Dad stepped closer, his voice dropping to an angry whisper. "We sacrificed everything for you kids. We worked ourselves to the bone so you could have opportunities. Now you're successful, and you won't even help your own brother." "I offered to help," I reminded him. "Just not in the way you're demanding." "The penthouse, Beverly." Mom's tone turned pleading. "He just needs the penthouse. You could find another place, maybe something smaller, more reasonable." The audacity of the request left me speechless for a moment. They weren't asking for temporary help or a loan. They wanted me to give up the home I'd worked 12 years to afford so that Carlos could maintain a lie to his new wife. "That's not happening," I said finally. "Ever." Dad's face was red now with anger and embarrassment as more family members drifted closer to our conversation. "Stop being selfish, Beverly. Your brother needs help, and you're the only one who can provide it." "I'm being selfish." I couldn't keep the incredulity out of my voice. "I'm selfish for wanting to keep the home I worked 3 jobs to afford. I'm selfish for refusing to enable Carlos's dishonesty." Agnes began crying, then the kind of dramatic tears she'd used to manipulate situations since I was a child. "How can you abandon family like this? How can you watch your brother struggle when you have so much—" The unfairness of it all crashed over me. Every sacrifice I'd made, every night I'd chosen work over social events, every time I'd pushed myself harder to build something meaningful, had led to this moment. My success wasn't seen as an achievement to be proud of, but as a resource to be redistributed to family members who hadn't made the same choices. "I'm not abandoning anyone," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm setting reasonable boundaries. There's a difference." But Dad was beyond reason now, his frustration with his own financial limitations and embarrassment in front of Janet's wealthy family boiling over into rage directed at me. "Reasonable boundaries." Dad's voice rose loud enough that nearby conversations stopped. "Is that what you call turning your back on your own brother?" Carlos appeared. then drawn by the commotion with Janet close behind him. My brother looked panicked as he took in the scene, his new wife's confused expression, the growing circle of wedding guests pretending not to watch our family drama unfold. "What's going on?" Carlos asked, though his pale face suggested he knew exactly what was happening. "Your sister is being stubborn," Mom announced, her tears flowing freely now. "We're asking for a little help, and she's acting like we're trying to rob her." Janet looked between her new husband and me, clearly picking up on tensions she didn't understand. "Is everything okay? Can we help with something?" The irony wasn't lost on me. Janet, in her innocence, was offering to help resolve a crisis created by her husband's deception about his financial situation. I felt sorry for her in that moment, marrying into a family dynamic she couldn't possibly comprehend. "Everything's fine," Carlos said quickly, shooting me a pleading look. "Just family stuff." But Dad was too angry to let it go, too humiliated by his inability to solve his son's problems, too resentful of my success. "Beverly won't help her own brother. We raised her, put her through school, sacrificed everything so she could have a better life. Now she's successful, and she won't share any of it with family." "That's not true," I protested, but Dad wasn't finished. "We're not asking for charity," he continued, his voice carrying across the terrace. "We're asking for family loyalty. Carlos and Janet need a place to live, and Beverly has a huge penthouse with extra bedrooms, but she's too selfish to share." I could see Janet processing this information, her face changing as she realized what was being discussed. Carlos looked like he wanted to disappear into the ground. Other wedding guests had stopped pretending not to listen, and I spotted Janet's parents among the crowd, their faces showing confusion and disapproval. "I offered to help in other ways," I said, trying to salvage some dignity from the situation. "But my home isn't available for discussion." "Your home?" Dad's face was purple now with rage and embarrassment. "You mean the home you could afford because we sacrificed everything for your education? You mean the success you built on the foundation we provided?" The crowd was growing larger, drawn by the spectacle of a family destroying itself at what should have been a celebration. I could see phones coming out, guests discreetly recording what was becoming an epic wedding disaster. "Harold, please," Agnes whispered, finally recognizing that they were creating a public scene. But Dad was beyond caring about appearances. Years of financial stress, decades of feeling powerless, and the acute humiliation of being unable to help his son in front of Janet's wealthy family had broken something in him. "Give Carlos the penthouse, Beverly," he demanded, his voice carrying clearly across the terrace. "Stop being a selfish brat and help your family." "No," I said firmly, my own anger finally rising to match his. "I will not give up my home so that Carlos can lie to his wife about his financial situation." Carlos flinched at my words, and Janet's face went white as the truth hit her. But I was past caring about protecting anyone's feelings. My family had dragged this private matter into public, embarrassing me at my brother's wedding, and I was done enabling their dysfunction. "You owe us," Dad snarled, stepping closer until he was right in my face. "Everything you have, you owe to us." "I don't owe you my home," I replied, standing my ground despite the intimidating way he loomed over me. That's when it happened. In front of 200 wedding guests, with phones recording and Janet's horrified family watching, my father drew back his hand and slapped me hard across the face. The sound echoed across the suddenly silent terrace like a gunshot. My cheek burned, and I could taste blood where my teeth had cut the inside of my lip. But what hurt worse than the physical pain was the shock of betrayal, the realization that my own father had chosen public violence over accepting my boundaries. For a moment, nobody moved. Carlos stood frozen, his mouth open in horror. Janet had her hands pressed to her face in shock. Mom was crying harder now, seeming to realize that Dad had just crossed a line they couldn't uncross. The wedding guests stood in stunned silence, many still holding their phones up, capturing every moment of my family's destruction. I touched my burning cheek, feeling the heat of the handprint Dad had left there. Then I looked directly into his eyes, my voice calm and clear enough for everyone to hear. "You just lost me forever." The words weren't shouted or screamed. They were delivered with quiet certainty, a simple statement of fact that somehow carried more weight than any emotional outburst could have. I smiled then, not from happiness, but from the sudden liberating clarity of knowing exactly where I stood. I turned and walked away from my family without another word, my heels clicking against the stone terrace as 200 people watched in absolute silence. Behind me, I could hear Mom's wailing intensify, and Carlos trying to explain something to Janet, but their voices seemed to come from another world. In the country club's marble bathroom, I locked the door and stared at my reflection. The red handprint on my cheek was already darkening into a bruise, and my lip was slightly swollen. But my eyes were clearer than they'd been in years. The fog of family obligation and guilt that had clouded my judgment for so long had lifted in an instant. A soft knock interrupted my thoughts. "Beverly, it's Patricia, Janet's mother. May I come in?" I unlocked the door to find Janet's mom and two of her sisters standing in the hallway, their faces full of concern and outrage. "Oh, honey," Patricia said, gently touching my arm. "I am so sorry. What your father did was completely unacceptable." "We all saw it," added one of Janet's aunts. "That was assault, pure and simple. You could press charges." Their kindness was almost overwhelming after my family's cruelty. These women, virtual strangers, were showing me more compassion than my own parents had. "Are you all right?" Patricia asked. "Do you need medical attention? We can call someone." "I'm fine," I said, and realized I meant it. "I'm actually better than I've been in years." They looked puzzled, but I couldn't explain how liberating it felt to finally see my family's dysfunction clearly. The slap had been shocking, but it had also been clarifying. There was no going back from this moment, no more pretending that love and manipulation were the same thing. "I need to leave," I told them. "Please tell Janet I'm sorry her wedding day got ruined by this. She deserves better." "This isn't your fault," Patricia said firmly. "What happened out there reflects on your father's character, not yours." I thanked them for their kindness and gathered my purse from the table where I'd left it. Walking through the country club's main entrance, I passed several guests who offered sympathetic looks and concerned comments, but I kept moving. I needed to get to my car, to my home, to the sanctuary I'd worked so hard to create. The drive back to Seattle felt like traveling between two different universes. Behind me was the world of family obligation and guilt, where my success was seen as communal property, and my boundaries were viewed as selfishness. Ahead was my penthouse, my space, my life free from people who would literally slap me for refusing their demands. In my living room, surrounded by the furniture I'd chosen and the view I'd earned, I sat in my favorite chair and let the full weight of what had happened settle over me. My phone was buzzing constantly with calls and texts, but I ignored them all. I knew what those messages would say. Apologies mixed with excuses, demands that I forgive and forget, manipulative arguments about family loyalty. Instead, I opened my laptop and began documenting everything. Every time I'd helped my family financially over the years, every guilt trip about my success, every instance where my achievements had been treated as family resources rather than personal accomplishments. The pattern was clear once I laid it all out. A 12-year history of emotional manipulation and financial exploitation. Then I started making changes. I called my bank and added additional security to my accounts. I contacted my building's security office to remove my parents' names from the visitor list they'd never actually been on. I blocked my family's phone numbers and social media accounts, creating the digital boundaries I should have established years ago. The most important call was to my lawyer not to press charges as Janet's family had suggested, but to make sure my will and estate planning documents were updated. I wanted to ensure that my hard-earned assets would go to people and causes I chose, not to family members who saw my success as their entitlement. As I changed the locks on my penthouse that evening using a 24-hour locksmith service, I felt like I was finally protecting something precious. Not just my physical space, but my right to say no, my right to set boundaries, my right to keep what I'd worked for. The next few days brought a barrage of attempted contact from my family. Carlos called repeatedly, leaving voicemails that started apologetic and grew increasingly desperate as he realized I wasn't answering. Mom sent long text messages about forgiveness and family healing. Dad surprisingly remained silent, perhaps finally understanding that his violent outburst had consequences. Extended family members tried to play mediator, calling with variations of the same message. Dad was sorry, emotions had run high. Family was family. But their arguments rang hollow. None of them addressed the core issue, which wasn't Dad's slap, but the years of manipulation and entitlement that had led to that moment. At work, my colleagues were incredibly supportive. Word of the wedding incident had spread through our professional network, partly because several of my clients had connections to Janet's family. Instead of judgment, I received overwhelming support from people who understood the pressure of family financial expectations. "You did the right thing," my business partner Marcus told me over coffee. "I've watched you build this company from nothing. Nobody has the right to demand you give up what you've earned, family or not." My therapist, Dr. Ellen Rodriguez, helped me process the complex emotions surrounding the situation. During our emergency session the Monday after the wedding, she helped me understand that my relief wasn't callousness, but health. Toxic family dynamics often maintain themselves through guilt and obligation, she explained. When you finally set firm boundaries, it can feel like betrayal to family members who've benefited from the dysfunction. But setting boundaries isn't mean or selfish. It's essential for your well-being. Through therapy, I began to understand the generational patterns that had shaped my family. My parents' financial insecurity had created a scarcity mindset where my success threatened their worldview. If hard work and education could lift someone out of poverty, what did that say about their own choices and circumstances? Carlos's situation became clearer too. He'd grown up watching our parents struggle despite working hard, so he'd unconsciously decided that traditional paths to success were pointless. Instead, he'd chased get-rich-quick schemes and relied on charm to solve problems. My success challenged his belief system, making him defensive and entitled rather than inspired. The most difficult part was accepting that I couldn't save any of them. I'd spent years thinking that if I just helped enough, gave enough, proved my loyalty enough, our family could heal its dysfunction. But healing requires acknowledgement of problems, and my family preferred to scapegoat me rather than examine their own patterns. 3 weeks after the wedding, Janet reached out. She asked to meet for coffee, and despite my reservations, I agreed. We met at a quiet cafe in Bellevue Neutral Territory, where we could talk privately. "I owe you an apology," she said immediately. "I had no idea about Carlos's financial situation or the pressure your family was putting on you. What happened at our wedding was horrific, and I'm ashamed it occurred at what should have been a celebration." I appreciated her directness. "How are you handling everything?" She sighed, looking exhausted. "Carlos finally told me the truth about his debts and his living situation. We're in marriage counseling trying to figure out if we can build something honest together. It's been difficult. I'm sorry you're dealing with this so early in your marriage. The thing is," Janet continued, "I never expected you to solve our housing problem. If Carlos had been honest from the beginning, my family could have helped, or we could have found a smaller place we could actually afford. The deception was the problem, not the financial situation itself." Her words validated everything I'd been feeling. The issue had never been about money, but about honesty, respect, and boundaries. My family had asked me to participate in a deception that would have harmed Janet and enabled Carlos's irresponsibility. "Are you doing okay?" she asked. "Carlos is devastated about how everything played out. He keeps saying he never meant for it to go that far." "I'm doing better than I have in years," I told her honestly. "I'm sorry Carlos is struggling, but I can't fix his problems for him anymore." We parted on good terms with mutual respect and understanding. Janet was working to build an honest marriage despite a rocky start, while I was working to build a life free from family manipulation. 6 months later, my life had transformed in ways I never could have imagined. Without the constant stress of family financial demands and guilt manipulation, my energy and creativity flourished. My real estate business expanded beyond my wildest projections as I finally had the mental space to pursue ambitious deals I'd always been too distracted to consider. I hired 2 additional agents and opened a second office in Bellevue specializing in luxury waterfront properties. The success wasn't just financial but personal. Without family drama consuming my emotional bandwidth, I could focus on building genuine relationships with clients and colleagues who respected my expertise and professionalism. My dating life improved dramatically too. For years, I'd struggled to maintain romantic relationships because family crises always seemed to interrupt important moments. Men I dated had grown frustrated with my unavailability, not understanding that I was constantly managing other people's emergencies. Now, freed from those obligations, I could be fully present in my personal relationships. I'd been seeing David, a software engineer I'd met through mutual friends, for 3 months. He appreciated my ambition and success rather than seeing them as threats or resources to exploit. Our relationship was built on mutual respect and shared values, something I'd never experienced while carrying the weight of family dysfunction. "You seem different lately," he observed over dinner at our favorite restaurant overlooking Elliott Bay. "More relaxed, more confident." I thought about how to explain the change. I finally learned that loving people doesn't mean accepting unacceptable behavior from them. The legal aftermath of the wedding incident had resolved quietly. I never pressed charges against Dad, but Janet's family's connections had ensured that word of his violent outbursts spread through certain social and professional circles. The consequences were social rather than legal, which felt appropriate to me. Carlos and Janet were still married, but living in a modest apartment in Kent, well within their actual budget. Carlos had found steady work at a tech startup, not the entrepreneurial success he'd always chased, but honest employment that paid the bills. I heard through mutual acquaintances that they were doing better building their marriage on truth rather than deception. My parents had attempted reconciliation through intermediaries several times, but I'd maintained my boundaries. I wasn't interested in partial apologies or conditional acknowledgments of wrongdoing. The relationship had been fundamentally unhealthy, built on patterns of manipulation and entitlement that couldn't be fixed with surface-level apologies. The hardest part had been accepting that I might never have a relationship with my family again. Holidays were strange, quieter, but more peaceful. I'd created new traditions with friends who'd become my chosen family, people who celebrated my successes rather than seeing them as obligations. My therapist helped me understand that grief was natural even when leaving a toxic situation. I was mourning the family I'd wished I had, not necessarily the family I'd actually lost. The fantasy of unconditional family love was harder to release than the reality of conditional family manipulation. "Healthy families celebrate each other's successes," Dr. Rodriguez reminded me during one session. "They don't see individual achievements as family property or expect successful members to subsidize everyone else's choices." Through therapy, I'd also examined my own patterns. I realized that my drive for success had been partly motivated by a desire to prove myself worthy of family love and acceptance. Now I was learning to pursue goals for my own satisfaction rather than external validation. As I sit in my penthouse office on this crisp Seattle morning, looking out at the mountains and water that still take my breath away, I'm reflecting on the journey that brought me here. 18 months have passed since that terrible and liberating day at Carlos's wedding, and I can honestly say I've never been happier or more at peace. The slap that shocked 200 wedding guests became the catalyst for the most important decision of my adult life. Walking away from my family wasn't easy, but it was necessary. Sometimes the people who claim to love us most are the ones who damage us the deepest, using our love and loyalty as weapons against our well-being. I've learned that setting boundaries isn't cruel or selfish. It's an act of self-preservation and ultimately self-love. I spent years trying to earn my family's unconditional acceptance by meeting their conditional demands, never realizing that real love doesn't come with a price tag attached. My business continues to thrive, and last month I was featured on the cover of Seattle Business Magazine as one of the city's most successful young entrepreneurs. The article focused on my innovative approach to luxury real estate and my commitment to ethical business practices. Reading it, I felt proud, not just of my professional achievements, but of the person I'd become in the process. David and I moved in together last month, combining our lives in my penthouse that once seemed too big for one person. He brings his own success and stability to our relationship, creating a partnership based on mutual support rather than financial dependence. We're talking about marriage, about building a family based on healthy communication and respect, rather than manipulation and obligation. The most surprising development has been my relationship with Janet. We've become genuine friends, bonding over our shared experience of dealing with my family's dysfunction. She and Carlos are doing well, their marriage stronger for having survived its difficult beginning. They've learned to build their life on what they can actually afford, rather than what they think they deserve. "You saved our marriage in a way," Janet told me recently over lunch. "If you'd given us the penthouse, Carlos would never have learned to face his problems honestly. We would have built our life on a foundation of lies and other people's sacrifices." I've also discovered the joy of using my success to help causes I care about, rather than people who feel entitled to it. I've established a scholarship fund at Pierce College for students from working-class backgrounds, helping young people achieve their dreams through education and hard work. I volunteer with a local organization that helps domestic violence survivors rebuild their financial independence. These experiences have taught me the difference between helping and enabling. True help empowers people to solve their own problems and build sustainable independence. Enabling, which is what my family had expected from me, creates dependence and resentment while solving nothing. The hardest lesson I've learned is that some relationships are meant to end. We're taught that family bonds are sacred and permanent, but sometimes family members use that supposed permanence as license to treat us badly. Real love respects boundaries, celebrates success, and wants the best for everyone involved. I don't hate my parents or Carlos. I understand now that their behavior came from their own pain, insecurity, and learned patterns of dysfunction. But understanding someone's motivations doesn't mean accepting unacceptable treatment. Compassion can coexist with boundaries. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be happier without my family in my life, I wouldn't have believed them. Family was supposed to be everything, the foundation of love and support that made all other achievements meaningful. But I've discovered that chosen family built on shared values and mutual respect can be just as meaningful as biological connections. The people in my life now celebrate my successes without expecting to share in them financially. They support my dreams without trying to control them. They love me for who I am, not what I can provide for them. This is what healthy relationships look like, and I'm grateful every day for the painful lesson that taught me the difference. My penthouse isn't just a symbol of financial success anymore. It's a sanctuary I earned through hard work and protected through healthy boundaries. Every morning when I wake up to that incredible view, I'm reminded that I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be, living exactly the life I've chosen to create. So to anyone watching this who's struggling with family members who see your success as their entitlement, who use guilt and manipulation instead of respect and support, I want you to know that it's okay to say no. It's okay to protect what you've worked for. It's okay to love people from a distance if that's what your mental health requires. You don't owe anyone your happiness, your financial security, or your peace of mind, no matter how they're related to you. Real family, whether biological or chosen, lifts you up rather than tearing you down. They celebrate your achievements rather than trying to claim ownership of them. The slap my father gave me at my brother's wedding was intended to force my compliance, to shock me into submission. Instead, it freed me from a lifetime of manipulation and guilt. Sometimes the worst thing that happens to you becomes the catalyst for the best decision you ever make. Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who felt entitled to your success? How did you handle the guilt and pressure that comes with saying no to people you love? Share your experiences in the comments below, because these stories matter and can help others facing similar situations. If this story resonated with you, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life experiences about family dynamics, setting boundaries, and building the life you truly deserve. Don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that it's okay to put their own well-being first. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you have the right to protect your peace, your success, and your happiness, no matter who tries to convince you otherwise. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to treat you with basic respect and dignity. Until next time, keep building the life that makes you proud, surrounded by people who celebrate your light instead of trying to dim it.